everyone, my name is Essen. This is the Brown History Podcast, and you are listening to episode 15 with our guest, Nikesh Shukla. He's a very nice guy, very cool dude. He has his hands everywhere. He's involved in a lot of youth projects. He's a writer. He has a short film on YouTube called Two Dosas, which I highly recommend. I noticed him first when his book came out, The Good Immigrant, in the UK, which was a compilation of essays, non-fiction essays written by people of color who explore and discuss topics like diversity, being a minority in the UK, racism, etc. Which is where episode 2 of the Brown History Podcast came from. There was an essay in that book. A few years later, he made The Good Immigrant, the American version, with American writers of color who talk about the same things, but also about Trump, because you couldn't ignore that fact. And today, he has a new book out. It's a memoir addressed to his daughters. It's called Brown Baby, a memoir of race, family, and home. So definitely check that out. Anyways, we talk about a lot of things, so I hope you enjoy it. And here we go. I need a theme song. I'm asking you, have you seen Danny Boyle's Yesterday with Himesh Patel? And I'm only asking that is because that movie is the reason how I discovered you. So I kind of want to use that as a segue into the follow-up questions. Now, I'm not asking you if you like the story or not. I'm asking you basically how you felt that your friend, I'm assuming, not the
He's
guy,
my boy.
he's your boy, who's out
He's my
there
boy.
in the movie. He's singing songs from the Beatles, a white UK band. How did you feel about that?
You know, it's a weird thing because so we're the reason that Himesh got that film. So like Himesh used to be in this soap called EastEnders in the UK, and I used to watch that with my mum obsessively. And you know, Himesh was in it ever since he was a teenager, and me and my mum were always like, "This guy is hilarious." He is so underutilized with how funny he is. He's so dry, so witty, so his timing is impeccable. And when me and my friend Sam Sarmad Masood, we were circling around making a short film, and you know, we were both thinking a lot about South Asian masculinity. And you know, I ended up writing an essay about it for Catapult about like how South Asian men are always depicted as wanking foreigners. And basically, a friend of mine had sent me the link to this article called The Three Bears Theory, which posited like popular culture posits like the object of desire in Western popular culture is like the Goldilocks figure, like the busty blonde. And the busty blonde is presented with three options, like the Asian, be it South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, who is sexually repressed with a small dick, or the black man who is sexually aggressive with a big dick, or the perfectly normal, perfectly middle of the road white guy whose dick is just right. And it blew my mind reading that, because I was like, oh my God, this is popular. I now understand all of popular culture. And so me and Saramad were really obsessed with like wanting to do a short film. We had an opportunity to do a short film. We were like, let's do a rom-com. And let's do a rom-com where we put like a nerdy Asian guy in it as a romantic lead, but we make him look hot. And I was like, I want Himesh to do it. Himesh has to do it. And Sam was like, okay, cool, we'll see him. And Himesh had, like, he was in the process of leaving EastEnders, and so he'd like grown his hair out and he looked amazing. And we were immediately like, this is our lead. And we did this film called Two Doses, and he was amazing. And it was like the first thing he'd done since EastEnders. And we like became really great friends. And like it toured a bunch of film festivals, and one of those film festivals, it won an award that like Danny Boyle was the judge, and Danny Boyle cast him off the back of seeing Two Doses, which was really amazing because it also made it into all the press notes that Danny Boyle had seen him in this short film.
Yes.
Now I've seen the film, and I think it's amazing to see a South Asian romantic lead. It'd have been really nice if he'd been going out with a brown girl. I don't think they thought too much about the about Asian households, because you know, I say this with love to Himesh and love to Mira Sial and Sanjeev Bhaskar, who are absolute heroes and dons of mine. what kind of self-respecting Asian household lets everyone wear shoes in the house? I do not understand how that made it through. Um, so, but the film is sort of a weird
That's
nonsense,
true. I didn't
right?
even think of that.
Like
I didn't even notice that.
it, it's sort of it's sweet, but it's also a weird nonsense. Like it makes no, it makes no sense. But I think I'm glad it exists.
Okay, and I
But just to finish that, reason I'm glad it exists is because so often in conversations around representation, and I'm a really much as I do a lot of work around representation, I get increasingly frustrated that people just think that representation is the end goal. Like representation is not the end goal. Uh, but in order for us to have something that is beyond the end goal of representation, we need to have like brown romantic leads in films that are fine. We need to have brown action heroes in films that are fine. We need to have like brown auteurs doing amazing cutting edge artistic work. We need to have brown like that is, for me, is diversity, and that for me is representation, is people getting to have all of the opportunities of all of the brilliant, weak and mediocre white people and still have careers at the end of it.
I read a lot of your essays, and one emotion that kind of stands out, I mean, from my opinion, is that you're very angry about everything. There's, you know, with all due
How
respect,
dare you?
about all these
How dare
diversity
you?
questions and these kind of patronizing YouTube titles where it says why diversity matters, and you're like, why are we still talking about this? And there's one essay that you wrote where you are talking about how you told everyone who voted for Brexit to F off, and you're defending that kind of speech where it's enough's enough, and you just want to be. I mean, at one, it's like if you speak how you feel, you're portrayed as this savage. And but
Yeah,
if you're obedient and you kind of follow the rules of mannerism, nothing gets done. And you talk about how civility is kind of used as a colonial tool. And
mm.
I didn't think of that for a long time until today when I read that, and I'm like, you know what, that's right. Because then I see all these YouTube videos with titles that say why diverse stories matter and why is it important to include BAME writers, and it's just kind of like we're still at this level, and maybe I felt like saying F off to everybody.
Yeah. I feel like I've had enough of it all because the you just have to look at the Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on this year, and sorry, you're going to edit out that burp, I hope.
No, no.
That's going to make me very angry. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Write an essay about
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Brown history account allows. No, I'm not even.
Right, Judas, the
Yeah,
Judas of brown people.
yeah. So many people were like, so many of the racists who criticized the protests were like, oh, if they just made their point in a civil way, and if they did peaceful protest and all the rest of it, and they were like, well, we tried it, we
Mm-hmm.
tried that, and nothing happened. And there is, I think there is something to be said about violence and anger and justifiable violence, and this feeling of enough is enough. Because the other thing is, like, I don't want to always be talking about diversity. For me, like, diversity is like so basic, it's not even anything particularly radical that I even ask for, which is like more books by brown people on our shelves.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, I've seen people in the publishing industry in the UK describe me as a diversity activist, and I'm always like,
I
what the
saw
fuck
that.
is
I
a
read that.
diversity
I read that. I was going to ask you. I literally have it written down. What does that mean?
What does it mean?
It
I
sounds
I just
important.
think, but it's a nonsense, right? It doesn't mean anything. I'm not like, what I'm doing there is not activism. Like the stuff that I do behind the scenes that I don't tweet about, that I do like in terms of an organizational level, in terms of youth projects that I do, that is activism, you know. And to have like my tweets about diversity be described as activism, I just think people, this is just a nonsense. And I get so frustrated that that's where we're stuck at. We're stuck at like talking about whether there should be a black James Bond, and we're nowhere near talking about like we're so behind in the conversation in the UK. We're still talking about whether there should be a black James Bond, that we're not even able to posit the theory that police in the UK can be extremely violent, and that there is a problem with mass incarceration of black people and working class people from certain South Asian communities. And because we can't get past one, we never arrive at the other. And it becomes really frustrating. So like I've just had to like step away from it recently and just go, you know what, the stuff that I'm doing that is not online is the stuff that's much more useful. Because otherwise you just get stuck in like being the person whose tweets people put in newspaper articles about nonsense. You know, I think a lot about my uncle Mehesh Mama, who you very kindly covered on the Brown History IG account, and he was the first person in the UK to ever bring a case of racial discrimination under the 1968 Race Relations Act. And the thing that I think about all the time is that he did that when everyone around him was telling him not to. Like his work was saying, don't do this. You know, his my family was telling him, don't bring this case. His friends were telling him, don't bring this case, and he was like, no, well, I have to do it. It's right. It's what the right thing to do. And then years later, my uncle, excuse me, my uncle and I talk, and he's like, you know, after Brexit, he was absolutely heartbroken. He was like, this just proves that they could make whatever laws that they want in this country, but nothing is being done to change people's hearts and minds. You know, we were talking about, so like the case that my uncle brought to court in 1968 was he tried to buy a house, and the people wouldn't sell the house to him because he was brown, and they didn't want to devalue the area, and so he said that was discrimination and took them to court. And then in 2017, there was a case in the UK of this landlord who refused to rent properties to South Asians because he said they just stank the place out with their curry smell. And he was talking to me about it, going, I fought this case 50 years ago. What has changed? Nothing. Nothing has been done to change people's hearts and minds. And then, like, obviously in the country in the last 2 years, you've seen what's happened to the Windrush generation, where they've been illegally deported. And you just think this country is just a nonsense built on a lie. And that's why we're still stuck at the conversation about whether there should be a black James Bond.
Are you hopeful? Like, are you optimistic? Do you have
Today.
faith in the future? You have a child, I think, right? And are you hopeful that he's going to grow up in a better environment than you did?
It's a good question. I've got two daughters and
2 daughters.
And I wrote a memoir about parenthood and joy and hope that's coming out in February 2021. Ironically, a book, it was supposed to come out in September, but ironically, a book that was about finding joy in the world got pushed back 6 months because of a global pandemic that no one could have predicted. And but in the book, I try and find a way forward for my kids. I was listening to a podcast episode with Zadie Smith talking to Adam Buxton like last week or something, and she was talking about how she felt like kids were being robbed of their present because they were fighting and protesting for their right to exist now, but the sad thing was they had no future because of climate change. And she was just trying to square those two things in her head, and
That's depressing.
it is depressing. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about like what I was trying to do in the book, because I can't tell my daughters, we fucked this world, it's yours now, you've got to fix it. I can't tell them that. I have to basically raise them to be boundless and feel the infinite potential of the world. And some days I just don't know how to do that. Like, you know, it, the longer we stay in lockdown, the longer I have these sort of irrational panics where I'm just like, well, this is just the way everything is now. This is just, I'm never going to see my dad ever again. Like my bar's going to die, and I'm never going to get to hold her. And I've in those moments I feel hopeless, but then I find, okay, so today our government did a big U-turn over exam results. I don't know if it probably didn't make the news outside of the UK, but basically, because of COVID, all of these kids had their exams, their A-level exams, decided by an algorithm, and because of postcodes and like poor performance of schools, loads and loads of kids found themselves downgraded and like not getting their university places, and you know, basically screwing their prospects for the future. And everyone was like, you can't do that. You can't have an algorithm do this. This is utterly wrong and preposterous. And the government bowed to public pressure and like kids protesting on the streets outside the Houses of Parliament, and they did a big U-turn, and they're changing how they're going to award those kids those grades. And so every now and then something like that happens, and I think, yeah, the kids are all right. But then um and I just have to stay with that thought, because if I don't think that the kids are all right, then because they're the ones who are going to inspire my kids, you know, the kids who are out in the streets now are the role models that my kids are going to be looking up to in like 2, 3, 4 years time.
That's true. Yeah. I think personally you just have to fake it. Like you have no choice but to be optimistic. Delusional maybe, but you just gotta pretend that whatever you do will make a change. But that's me. When I
so,
watched
so
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is the thing that I talk about in the book, in Brown Baby, the memoir that's coming out next year. I tried to basically understand that a lot of my day-to-day frustration is because I'm raging at the world on social media, and it's very easy to quote tweet Trump and call him a dickhead and feel powerless because nothing changes, because he's not like scanning his tweets and going, oh my god, Nikesh called me a dickhead. Yeah, maybe he's right, maybe I am a dickhead, maybe I need to change my ways. And so when you're flinging that energy out into the world, you know, you're basically throwing a small stone into a huge ocean. Whereas the thing that I've been really thinking about in lockdown, and I kind of posited it as a theory in the book, was what is the opposite of quote tweeting Trump? And it's like, well, there's me and fixing myself, and there's fixing my family, and then there's thinking about our home space, and then there's thinking about our street. And like, yeah, I live on a street with lots of people who I probably don't agree with politically, or I probably don't like the same shows as them, or you know, what have you. But we all want to live on a street that feels like it's a nice place to live. So like, there's our street. So then, what does that mean for our part of the city? What does that mean for our city? What does that mean for our? And so like slowly expanding outwards, but doing the work and starting with yourself, like it's it's really important. A friend was let me just find the term that he used, because I thought it was really interesting. Sorry, this is really boring for your podcast
No,
listeners.
no, not at all.
Man scrolls through WhatsApp conversations to find a term, surge capacity. He was talking about how like there's this thing of like, you know, our short-term survival instincts give us this surge capacity. And so like in the first few months of lockdown, a lot of people were like just throwing themselves into the new way of things with this surge capacity thing. But like, because nothing has ostensibly changed for like the last 6 months, that surge capacity is now depleted. And so a lot of those people who seemed to be bossing lockdown in the early days are now probably the ones you need to check in with and text and go, are you okay, my friend? And I definitely teeter between those two things all of the time, because like on the one hand I'm like, I'm doing all this work, I'm writing these things and I'm working on these things and developing these things, but on the other hand I'm like, what's the fucking point? Surely I should just be, you know, trying to just be present with my kids. But it's just a remind. I just need to remind myself that it is possible to do both. You know, you've basically caught me at like it's late night in the UK. I've just run a workshop. I'm slightly spacey, and I'm just like rambling like quasi hippie bullshit.
I don't I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I mean, I've seen what you do. I've seen it. It is really inspiring. I watched your Two Dosas short film. I went on YouTube and I watched the whole thing, and I was so inspired by it. I thought it was such an amazing piece of work that I literally grabbed. I went to the dollar store, I bought a notebook, and I tried to write a script just so that I could like be part of your world. That's how inspiring that
Oh,
movie
bro.
was. It's just it was.
Oh,
I've
bro.
never
That's amazing.
I've never seen anything like that. I literally, and I don't know if you remember, but I DM'd you right away and I said, "Hey man, I just watched your Two Dosas and it should be a movie. It should be a TV show. Why hasn't it been something?" And do you remember what you wrote back?
I think I probably wrote because of racism.
Yes, yes. And you added, no one believes a brown guy falling in love.
Yeah. Yeah, I really remember that conversation. No, but it's true. Like me and Salman, we tried to get it set up as a sitcom with 2 or 3 places, and we ultimately boiled down to everyone feeling that the story was too small. The story of 2 people falling in love was just too small, or a guy like looking for love was too small, and it kind of it's it something weird happens when you're constantly told that your stories are too small. Literally, like what the fuck was Mad Men about? It was about like men in the 60s doing their jobs, sometimes well, sometimes badly. That's kind of a small show, you know? Um, so, like, to be, what was Seinfeld was literally about nothing
That's
and it
true.
ran for 11 seasons. So, to be told that your stories are too small before you've even got them off the ground, it just reminds you who gets to have small stories. And um that other thing about like no one believes a brown guy falling in love is because like the Western gaze doesn't allow for us to be joyful. It doesn't allow for us to find happiness. My friend Musa Okwongo, amazing writer and amazing poet, said this thing to me a couple of weeks ago that's just really stayed with me. He said, why must the oppressed always be called upon to comment on their oppression? Why aren't the oppressors being called upon to comment on their oppressiveness?" And that's really stayed with me because there is this thing about you know we're all only ever called upon to talk about issues that are specific to our community, and yes, there is this sort of like tension that yes, we want to be able to talk about issues specific to our community, but at the same time we don't want that to be the only call we get. And sometimes I just want to write about happiness and joy and love. And you asked me, am I hopeful? And I really feel like at the moment, the stuff that I'm working on, it has to be hopeful, because even if I'm not, the message that I give to people has to be one of hope. It has to be one of radical empathy. It has to be one of um, joy, because I can't keep writing about oppression. It's not good for me. It's not good. You would like. I know you were joking, but you were like, you seem like an angry guy. I'm like,
I wasn't joking.
I was giving you an opportunity to say I'm not angry. No, I'm joking.
Uh,
There's a bit at the end of the first Avengers film where Captain America says to Bruce Banner, like, "Can you do that thing? Can you do that Hulk out thing? Can you get angry?" Because there's these monsters flying towards him, and Bruce Banner starts walking away from him, tears his shirt off, starts hulking out, and he turns back to Captain America and he says, "Do you know what my secret is?" And Captain America says, "What?" And he goes, "The secret is I'm always angry." And that's how I feel a lot of the time. I'm always angry. But how I dispense that anger has been something that I've been thinking about a lot, because you know I I personally, you know, I'm not I'm not going to sit here and tell people how to utilize their social media, but I personally feel like my anger is not best placed going after individuals when they fuck up. My anger, because like I can get into certain rooms and have certain conversations at certain levels. My anger has to be directed at systems where possible, and systems within the industry where I wield a little bit of power. And it's really important that I take that anger and I stop like scattering it across my timeline and like focus it in a productive way in the sorry, the
I
windows
heard
are
I
open.
heard a doors. I heard a door shut.
Yeah, no, I'm right by, I don't, my my place goes straight onto the street, and when the windows open it sounds like there are people in the house,
Mm.
and I should be the only one awake right now. um the yeah So like it's really important that I just utilize that anger in a way that is going to be productive in some way.
You have done a lot of productive work. I mean, you have two book collection of essays, two books called The Good Immigrant, and there's the American version, The Good Immigrant. And I don't know if you were trying to be political with those books, but it comes off as political because it's about different people of color who come in and talk about race, feminism, being a minority, and so there is. I mean, that I don't know if it had any. I mean, you should feel good about that. You basically did what I'm doing on Instagram, but you did it in a book form where you took collections of work and you brought it together for people to kind of read and see what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting with those books because the first one I did was basically like um it was basically a project to show people in publishing where the good writers were. So many times like we'd go, where are all the black and brown writers? And they'd go, well, we don't know where to find the talent. And I was like, okay, well, here's a book full of talent. So it was like, and then it became a book, once it became popular and it kind of grew beyond that sort of small thing of like trying to talk to publishers. It became a book about inspiring young people of color to kind of feel like that book was holding a mirror up to them, because we kind of wrote it in a political vacuum. We wrote it before Brexit and before Trump. And the thing that people always the interesting thing about that book is people always talk about like, oh, it's just such a great collection of personal experiences, I learned so much. And I was like, fuck off. Like, first of all, it's not a collection of personal experiences. We were all writing literature. We were all writing great works of literature. And this is the problem that brown and black writers have when they write about political issues. Like, so much time is spent focusing on the rhetoric and not on the fluidity of their words, on their sentence structure, on like the imagery and the symbolism and the metaphors that they're using. And like, we were all writing beautiful pieces of literature. They weren't personal experiences. And the second thing was like, we didn't put that book together to teach anyone shit. Like, it's not an educational book for fucking white people to go, oh, I read this and I'm no longer racist. And like, like the other day, I before I came off Twitter, I tweeted something about like, oh, how are all those unread uh, piles of anti-racism books on next to your bed get coming along? And someone replied and said, some of us are still reading and learning. And I wanted to reply and go, you've run out of time, get on with it. Like, it just made me realize that like, we didn't write that first book to teach people anything. We wrote that first book to hold a mirror up to young people of color who felt disconnected from their country, and disconnected from their culture, and felt like they were in an in-between world. And that for me really worked. Now the second book, the Good
The
Immigrant
American version,
USA,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, the interesting thing about that book was that was a political book, because now we had the success of the first book. We had um so um we had this thing to kind of live up to. We also had to think about the title, because like the word immigration means different things in North America than it does um in England. Like, and also a sarcastic subversive title in England might not translate in America. So we had to think about who we were going to approach. And the other thing was like, the big thing that people couldn't ignore in that second book was Trump. And
Hmm.
so the book became Trump was very present in that book in the way that Brexit wasn't present in the first book. And so I think that's probably why that first book blew up in the way that it did. And the second book, it still found a huge audience, but it it still feels like it's of a time and of a place than the first book was.
What is the difference between immigrant, the word immigrant in the UK, and the word immigrant in the USA?
Well, I don't think it's a difference in the meaning of the word. I think it's just a different history of immigration. So, like, while they're, you know, with the British Empire and like the history of slavery and stuff like, and there were slaves in the UK. There was, in the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, post Second World War, there was like a wave of immigration from the Caribbean islands and from different African countries and from South Asia as well. And people were invited here to work to help to rebuild the country, and so those immigrant communities were so much like, and because of the country is so much smaller, like those immigrant communities were so much more connected. But like when we spoke to writers of color in the US, we had to basically be like, there were, the conversation around immigration is specific and different to the conversation around race, in a way that like the two are much more intertwined in the UK. Whereas like in the US, like because of slavery, um, and because of issues of race and racism and immigration, they all feel like separate parts of like a really big conversation. And so like we had to basically, with that second book, just be really specific in what we were looking for with people. We couldn't really ask black people in America who were descended from slaves to write in a book called The Good Immigrant. That would just feel weird.
Right.
We had to just be sensitive to that, um
Did it
I
reach
don't know.
the same amount of success that the first one did? Or are you more
i th-
proud of the second one or the first one more?
I think they're both really, I think they're both amazing pieces of work for what they are. you know the first one continues to surprise me with like how it keeps finding audiences, and the second one, um I just think the quality of writing in the second one is just unbelievable. We got some amazing writers in there. And I'm really proud of both of them.
Before the Instagram account, I always imagined people, high profile South Asians, they've made it. But now that I'm, I guess, somewhat Instagram famous, and I'm speaking to all these people in their industries, and they've like kind of made it, have reached some kind of successful position. The more I get to know them, the more it feels like they're all kind of stuck in their own little cages, and they need as much help as I do to get somewhere. And it's really depressing. I always imagine if I were to meet Riz Ahmed, he would kind of, put a wand on me and I'll become successful too, and all the doors will open. But as I'm getting more into this, I see that he's also kind of struggling too, and you're struggling. And even though no matter how hard we work and how much followers we have and how much money we make, it just seems like we just go back to this hole until a white person comes in and allows us to do what we want to do. And then once we've made them their money, we go back in. Because if you look at Danny Boyle's Yesterday, and even though he was the lead actor and the director was very credible and then he was like an A-list director, Himesh Patel hasn't had much lead roles after that. And he's very talented. And I don't know. It's I don't know. I don't know what my question is, but that's how I see it. Am I wrong to see it
Yeah,
that way?
I think when you're a person of color in the arts in the West, in the UK and in America and North America and Canada and stuff, you have to make a choice. At some point, if you're lucky, a white person will open a door and invite you in. You can either go in and close the door behind you, or you can go in and leave the door open but walk away from it. Or you can go in, say to the white guy, "You go on ahead. I'm following. I'll follow you. jam your foot in the door, get your megaphone out, and start inviting other people in. And I do think that there is a part of me that wants to be the latter, the last one of those, for as much as I can, because for me, it's not about me being successful or me having to not struggle or me being the one. It's about all of us having opportunities, because like I've been, because of the Good Immigrant, I've had people like contact me and offer me weird things that, like, literally because they don't know another brown writer who could do these things. And I've always found it very useful to always have a list of like 10 black and brown writers who I could go ask these people. This isn't for me. Because like it's not a case of me like wanting to hoover up all of the opportunities. It's a case of like all of us having equal opportunities. No one wants special treatment. They just want equal treatment, you know? And so, yeah, so look, but to kind of speak to that point, to speak to that heaviness that I feel, that you perhaps feel when you have these conversations, is because like when I think about what I'm here to do, I'm here to write. I'm here to write books. I'm here to write TV shows. I'm here to write essays and short stories, and the occasional spoken word piece that no one should ever hear. But I get to spend, if I'm lucky, 45 minutes of my day, every single day I get to write, and that's it. Now the rest of my day, I am working on projects to diversify an industry. I mentor people. I run youth projects. I do events at schools and universities. I'm doing all of this other stuff to kind of to cast the widest net possible that this is something for all of us. And the thing that suffers the most is my ability to spend time developing my craft and being the person that I'm meant to be. And the true tragedy of this is like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Nick Hornby and like all these white writers, they're not sitting around having these conversations. They're sitting around being 100% brilliant at the stuff that they do. They get to just be writers and just be the personalities behind the writing. And they get to spend 100% of their job doing that stuff. And so the reality is, like, I feel like I get held back. I feel like I work twice as hard. I feel like I don't get paid as much as I should be. And I feel like I get to spend not as much time developing my craft as other people. And I get to never talk about my craft because I'm always asked to talk about diversity activism or whatever the hell that means. And so there is this feeling that people of color are held back because they're having to do all of this extra work to make their industries seem accessible for young people. And actually the real slack that could be taken up could be by white people. And yet, where are they? They're at home sitting on a pile of unread anti-racism reading list books.
Full circle. Damn, that was good. I wish I could talk like you.
I was thinking about this podcast and coming on it, and just, you know, I love what you do, and like, just that I have discovered so much amazing stuff. You're particular, like the one thing that stayed with me was the story of Iqbal Singh and the beautiful Baby of Bombay song and him joining the Navy. That was amazing. But I was thinking about doing this podcast, and I was like, this is the podcast I'm going to come on and just spill my guts and just
please.
I was like, I'm going to run a workshop for 2 hours, and I'm going to come and do the Brown History podcast, and I'm just going to lay it all out on the fucking line. I'm just no fucks left to give kind of vibes, because you know, if you're a young person listening to this, I don't want you to listen to this and think there isn't space for you. I want you to think, I deserve that space and I'm being held back from that space. Or no, I don't want you to think I'm being held back from that space. I just want you to feel like these spaces are owed to you. Take these spaces and don't take no for an answer.